The stagecoach horses stamped their hooves in the pre-dawn darkness outside the Nevada Bank, and trust, as Victoria Ellsworth loaded the last strongbox herself, refusing help from the nervous clerk who kept glancing down Hamilton's empty Main Street like he expected outlaws to materialize from the shadows. The year was 1882, and Victoria had been driving freight wagons since she was 18, earning a reputation across Nevada territory for getting cargo through when other drivers turned back. But this shipment was different. $50,000 in gold bars destined for the mint in Carson City, and the route cut straight through the 40-mile desert and the mountain passes where the Taggart Gang had robbed 3 shipments in the past 2 months. "Miss Ellsworth, are you certain about this?" The bank manager wrung his hands, his spectacles catching the lamplight from inside. "We could wait for the marshal to arrange an escort, perhaps a full armed guard." Victoria secured the leather straps over the strongboxes and checked the Winchester rifle mounted beside the driver's bench. Waiting means the payroll for the silver mines does not arrive on time. That means 300 men do not get paid, and you know what happens then. She climbed onto the bench, her split riding skirt allowing her the freedom of movement her mother had once called scandalous. At 24, Victoria had long since stopped caring what Hamilton's gossips thought about her unconventional profession. Besides, the Taggart Gang does not expect a lone woman. They watch for armed convoys. The manager opened his mouth to protest again, but Victoria had already taken up the reins. The 4-horse team knew her touch and responded immediately, pulling the heavily laden stagecoach into motion just as the first gray light touched the eastern mountains. She did not look back at the cluster of concerned faces watching from the bank's doorway. Fear was a luxury freight drivers could not afford, and she had made this run a dozen times before, just never with this much gold. The road out of Hamilton climbed through sage-covered hills, before descending into the alkali flats, where the summer heat could kill a horse in hours. Victoria had timed the departure to cross the worst of the desert in the cool morning hours, but she knew the real danger lay beyond the flats, in the rocky canyons where a dozen men could hide and stop a stagecoach with a single well-placed shot. She kept the team at a steady pace, conserving their strength while her eyes scanned the landscape with the practiced vigilance of someone who had learned to read the desert's moods. 2 hours outside Hamilton, as the sun began to heat the alkali dust into shimmering waves, Victoria noticed the rider. He sat his horse on a ridge about a quarter-mile to the south, silhouetted against the brightening sky, not moving, just watching. Her hand drifted toward the Winchester. Then she recognized the distinctive profile of the tall cowboy, who sometimes worked at the Bar 7 ranch outside town. She had seen him around Hamilton a few times, usually keeping to himself, the kind of man who seemed to carry his own weather system of quiet intensity. She kept driving, but the rider paralleled her course, maintaining his distance. Victoria felt her jaw tighten with irritation. If he thought she needed protecting, he had another thing coming. She had earned her independence the hard way, and she sure as hell did not need some cowboy deciding she required his supervision. But as the miles passed and the terrain grew rougher, the rider remained, a steady presence tracking her progress through the increasingly dangerous country. The road climbed into the foothills, where juniper and pinyon pine clung to the rocky slopes. Here the track narrowed, winding between boulders and through cuts where the stagecoach wheels barely cleared the stone walls. Victoria's attention focused completely on managing the team through the treacherous passage, and when she emerged into a wider canyon, she found the cowboy sitting his horse directly in her path. She hauled back on the reins, bringing the team to a halt in a cloud of dust. "Get out of my way." The cowboy touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that somehow managed to be both respectful and stubborn. He was younger than she had thought, probably no more than 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of a winter sky. "Name is Parker Garrison. I am riding shotgun. I did not hire you, did not figure you had." He guided his horse alongside the stagecoach, close enough that she could see the worn grip of the Colt on his hip and the Henry rifle in his saddle boot. "But I heard you were hauling something valuable through Bandit country, and seems like the kind of job that requires 2 guns instead of 1. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the desert sun. "I do not need charity, and I do not need protection. I have been running freight since before you probably learned to shave." Something that might have been a smile tugged at Parker's mouth. "That's so, because I have been shaving since I was 15, and I am betting you are not more than a year or 2 older than me." He shifted in his saddle, his expression turning serious. "Look, this is not about you being capable or not. The Taggart Gang rides with 8 men, and they are not particular about who they shoot. You can tell me to ride back to Hamilton, and I will do it. But I would sleep better knowing someone was watching your back through the passes." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "You do not know me. Why would you care whether I make it to Carson City or not?" Parker met her gaze, and something in his eyes made her breath catch despite herself. "Saw you in Hamilton last month. You were loading a wagon with mining equipment, doing it all yourself while 3 men stood around offering advice instead of help. When you finished, you climbed up on that bench and drove off like you were hauling feathers instead of half a ton of iron. I thought then that you were either the toughest person I had ever seen or the most stubborn. And I figured it was probably both." He gathered his reins. "I am riding with you whether you like it or not. You can let me sit beside you on that bench, or I can trail along behind like I have been doing. But I am not letting you face the Taggart Gang alone when I could have done something about it." Victoria stared at him, frustration warring with something else she did not want to name. Every instinct told her to send him away, to prove she could handle this run without anyone's help. But another part of her, a part she usually kept locked away, recognized the quiet determination in Parker's voice and knew he would keep his word. He would follow her through every mile of dangerous country, and if it came to a fight, he would put himself between her and the outlaws without hesitation. "Fine." She jerked her head toward the empty space beside her. "Tie your horse to the back and climb up. But if you slow me down or question my driving, I am leaving you in the next town we pass." Parker's smile was genuine this time, transforming his serious face into something that made Victoria's heart do an unexpected flip. He swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who had been born in a saddle and secured the animal to the rear of the stagecoach. When he climbed up beside her, she was acutely aware of how the bench forced them to sit close together, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "Ready when you are, Miss Ellsworth. Victoria." She snapped the reins and the team lurched into motion. "If you are going to get yourself killed on my account, you might as well use my first name. Then you better call me Parker, because I do not plan on getting killed at all." They drove in silence for the next hour, the road climbing higher into the mountains where ponderosa pines cast welcome shade across the track. Victoria remained hyper-aware of Parker's presence, the way he scanned the terrain with the same careful attention she did, how his hand rested near his rifle but never touched it nervously the way inexperienced men did. He knew how to be still, she realized, knew how to wait and watch without fidgeting or filling the silence with unnecessary talk. "You from Hamilton originally?" Parker asked as they crested a ridge and started down into a long valley where a creek sparkled in the afternoon sun. Colorado. Came here with my father 5 years ago when he got work as a teamster. Victoria guided the horses around a washout in the road. He taught me the trade, said there was no reason a woman could not do the work as well as a man if she had the strength and the sense. Sounds like a good man. He was. Victoria kept her eyes on the road. Died 2 years ago. Hart gave out on a run to Virginia City. I finished the delivery before I took him home to bury. Parker was quiet for a moment. I am sorry. He would have expected nothing less. She glanced at him briefly. What about you? The Bar 7 is not exactly known for keeping cowboys long term. Passing through, mostly. Did some work in Wyoming, some in Montana. Came south when winter hit early last year. He adjusted his hat against the slanting sunlight. I like Nevada, though. Something about the big sky and the way you can see for miles in every direction makes a man feel honest or exposed. That too. Parker pointed ahead where the road entered a narrow canyon, walls rising steep on both sides. That is the kind of place I would set up an ambush if I were planning one. Victoria's hands tightened on the reins. Devil's Cut. Only way through this part of the mountains unless we want to add 2 days to the journey. The Taggart Gang hit a payroll wagon here last month. Then we go through fast and we go through ready. Parker checked his rifle, his movements efficient and calm. You keep those horses moving no matter what happens. If shooting starts, you drive and I will handle the return fire. Do not stop, do not slow down. Agreed. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could shoot and drive at the same time, but the narrow canyon road required all her concentration. Agreed. The stagecoach wheels echoed off the rock walls as they entered Devil's Cut, the sound loud and ominous in the confined space. Victoria kept the team at a fast trot, faster than was probably safe on the rough track, but speed was their best defense. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she was aware of every shadow, every boulder that could hide a gunman. They were halfway through when Parker spoke softly. 3 o'clock, behind that fallen tree. Victoria saw the movement at the same instant Parker's rifle came up. The shot split the afternoon air, and she heard a yelp of surprise from behind the deadfall. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from both sides of the canyon, muzzle flashes bright in the shadows. Victoria whipped the reins, shouting at the horses, driving them into a gallop despite the dangerous footing. Parker fired methodically, not wasting shots, his body swaying with the motion of the stagecoach but his aim steady. A bullet whined past Victoria's ear and smashed into the strongbox behind her. 2 on the left, Parker shouted over the gunfire. He levered another round and fired, and one of the outlaws tumbled from his position on the rocks. Victoria saw riders emerging from cover ahead, trying to block the road. She aimed the team straight at them, gambling that they would break rather than get run down by 4 terrified horses pulling 2 tons of stagecoach. The gamble paid off. The riders scattered, and the stagecoach plunged between them. More shots followed them, but then they were through the narrowest part of the canyon, the walls falling away as the road opened into a broader valley. Victoria kept the horses running for another mile before she finally let them slow to a trot, their sides heaving with exertion. Parker was checking his rifle, his face grim. That was the Taggart Gang. I recognized their leader, the one with the silver conchos on his hat. Did you hit any of them? Winged at least 2, maybe killed 1. Hard to tell with all the dust and the speed we were moving. He looked at her and she saw concern in his eyes. You are bleeding. Victoria touched her cheek and her fingers came away red. Just a graze. Rock splinter probably. Before she could protest, Parker pulled a bandana from his pocket and gently wiped the blood from her face. His touch was surprisingly tender, and Victoria found herself frozen, staring at him while he tended the small wound. This close, she could see flecks of green in his blue eyes and a small scar on his jawline. "You are lucky it was not worse," he said quietly. "We both are." Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Thank you. For back there, if you had not spotted that first man when you did. That is what riding shotgun means." Parker tucked the bandana away, but his hand lingered near her face for just a moment before he pulled back. "We make a good team, Victoria." She faced forward again, unable to deal with the feelings churning in her chest. "We are not out of Bandit country yet. They might try again. Let them try." There was steel in Parker's voice now. "I will be ready." They drove on as the afternoon shadows lengthened, following the road as it wound through pine forests and across meadows where cattle grazed. Victoria remained tense, expecting another attack at every turn, but the miles passed peacefully. As the sun sank toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Parker pointed to a cluster of buildings ahead. "Miller's Station. We can water the horses and rest a few hours. The proprietor is honest, and he has a barn where we can secure the stagecoach." Victoria nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline from the attack had drained away, leaving her muscles shaky and her mind fogged with fatigue. When she pulled the team to a halt in front of the station's main building, she had to concentrate to keep her hands from trembling. Parker jumped down and was at her side before she could climb down herself, offering his hand. She took it, grateful for the support even as her pride bristled at needing help. His grip was warm and strong, and when her legs wobbled slightly on solid ground, he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy. You have been holding those reins tight for 8 hours. Give yourself a minute." The station keeper, a grizzled man named Miller who Victoria knew from previous runs, came out to greet them. His eyes widened when he saw the bullet holes in the stagecoach and the blood on Victoria's face. "Taggart Gang?" he asked. "Devil's Cut," Parker confirmed. "We need a secure place for the coach and feed for the horses. We will push on to Carson City before dawn." Miller nodded slowly, his gaze moving between Victoria and Parker with obvious curiosity. "I've got a barn with a lock and my own bed in the tack room. Nobody will touch your cargo tonight." He gestured toward the building. "Miss Ellsworth, there is a room upstairs you can use. I will have my wife bring up hot water and something to eat." Victoria wanted to protest that she needed to stay with the stagecoach, but Parker spoke before she could. "I will take first watch on the barn. You need rest." "I can take a watch, Victoria." Parker turned to face her fully, and the concern in his eyes made her breath catch. "You have been driving since before dawn. You need food and sleep. I will be right there with the gold, and Miller here will make sure nobody gets past his front gate. Please." The please undid her. Victoria found herself nodding, too tired to argue further. Miller's wife, a plump, kind woman named Ruth, led her upstairs to a small but clean room with a real bed and a pitcher of hot water. After Ruth brought up a plate of beef stew and fresh bread, Victoria ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind replaying the ambush in Devil's Cut. She could have died today. That bullet that had grazed her cheek could have been 2 inches to the right and blown through her skull. But what disturbed her more than her own close call was the memory of seeing Parker in the line of fire, calmly shooting back at men who wanted to kill them both. The thought of him taking a bullet, of seeing him fall, made her stomach clench with fear that had nothing to do with the gold shipment. When had he become more than just the stubborn cowboy who had insisted on riding shotgun? Victoria washed her face and hands in the warm water. then lay down on the bed fully clothed, intending to rest for just an hour before checking on the stagecoach. But exhaustion claimed her the moment her head touched the pillow, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke in darkness, disoriented and panicked until she remembered where she was. Moonlight streamed through the window, and when she checked her father's pocket watch, she saw it was past midnight. She had slept for 6 hours. Guilt propelled her out of bed and down the stairs, past Miller, who dozed in a chair by the cold fireplace, and out to the barn. The barn door stood slightly ajar, lamplight spilling through the gap. Victoria eased inside and found Parker sitting on a hay bale, his rifle across his knees, very much awake. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened. "Could not sleep?" he asked. "I slept too long. You should have woken me to take a watch." "You needed the rest more than I did." He gestured to another hay bale. "But since you are here, I would not mind the company." Victoria sat down, leaving a careful space between them. The stagecoach stood in the center of the barn, its cargo secure and untouched. The horses were in stalls along one wall, munching contentedly on hay. Everything was peaceful and quiet, so different from the chaos of the ambush. "You think they will try again?" she asked. "Taggart is not the type to give up easy, especially not on 50,000 in gold. But he does not know our schedule, does not know when we will reach Carson City. That works in our favor." Parker set his rifle aside and stretched, wincing slightly. "We leave before dawn, we can be there by tomorrow afternoon. And then what?" "Then you collect your payment and I ride back to Hamilton." He looked at her. "Unless you have got another dangerous cargo that needs hauling." Victoria smiled despite herself. "Are you volunteering to make this a regular arrangement, maybe?" Parker's voice dropped lower, more serious. "Or maybe I am just looking for an excuse to spend more time with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Victoria's heart raced, and she found herself unable to look away from his eyes. "Why? You barely know me." "I know you are brave enough to drive a fortune in gold through Bandit country alone. I know you do not back down from anything, no matter how scared you might be. I know you loved your father enough to finish his last job before you let yourself grieve." Parker leaned forward slightly. "And I know that when I saw you in Hamilton, something in my chest shifted and has not shifted back since." Victoria's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty. The men in Hamilton either dismissed her as unfeminine because of her work, or they saw her as a curiosity, someone to gossip about but never take seriously. Parker looked at her like she was both strong and beautiful, like those two things were not contradictory at all. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted quietly. "Romance, courtship, whatever you want to call it. My whole life has been freight wagons and making deliveries and proving I am as good as any man at the job. Then we will figure it out together." Parker reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, gentle and warm. "I am not asking you to give up anything, Victoria. I am just asking if maybe when we get to Carson City, you might let me buy you dinner. A real dinner, at a restaurant with tablecloths and everything." She laughed, surprised by the normalcy of the request after everything they had been through. "That sounds nice." "Yeah." The hope in his voice made her want to close the distance between them and kiss him right there in Miller's barn, surrounded by hay and horses and stolen gold. "Yeah." She squeezed his hand instead, letting the connection speak for her when words felt inadequate. They sat like that for a long time, hands linked, not talking, just being together in the quiet barn. Victoria felt something in her chest unwind, a tension she had carried for so long she had forgotten it was there. She had been alone since her father died, bearing the weight of his legacy and her own independence without anyone to share the burden. Having Parker beside her, solid and steady and unafraid of her strength, felt like coming home to a place she had not known she was searching for. "Tell me about Wyoming," she said eventually. "What made you leave?" Parker considered the question. "Nothing bad if that is what you are wondering, just restlessness, I guess. My family has a ranch up there, small operation but profitable. My older brother was always going to inherit it, and that was fine by me. I wanted to see more than the same valley I grew up in, so I left when I was 19, been drifting since." "Do you miss it, your family?" "Sometimes, but I learned something about myself out here." He looked at her. "I am not cut out to stay in one place just because it is safe or comfortable. I need something more, something that matters. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Victoria thought about all the times people had told her to settle down, get married, let someone else do the dangerous work. "I think we are both looking for something that is ours, something we chose rather than something we inherited. Maybe we just found it." The words sent warmth through Victoria's entire body. She wanted to say something equally meaningful, but the sound of voices outside the barn made them both tense. Parker released her hand and grabbed his rifle, moving silently to the door. Victoria followed, drawing her own pistol from her belt. Miller's voice carried clearly through the night air. "I told you there is no stagecoach here. You must have the wrong station," a rougher voice answered. "Do not lie to me, old man. We tracked them here from Devil's Cut. That driver has something that belongs to us." Victoria's blood ran cold. The Taggart Gang had found them. She looked at Parker, saw the grim determination on his face. He pointed to the back of the barn where a smaller door led to the corral, then gestured for her to get the horses ready. She nodded understanding and moved quickly, keeping low. The horses sensed the tension and shifted nervously as she harnessed them to the stagecoach as quietly as possible. Outside, the confrontation was escalating. "I do not know what you are talking about," Miller insisted, but his voice shook. "Search the barn," the outlaw leader commanded. Parker appeared at Victoria's side, helping her with the last of the harness straps. "When I open that back door, you drive like hell toward Carson City. There is only one way up to the station, so they will have to turn around to chase you. That gives you a head start. What about you?" "I will give you more time, buy you as much distance as I can." Victoria grabbed his arm. "No, I am not leaving you to face 8 men alone. Victoria, that gold needs to get through. 300 miners need their pay." His eyes blazed with intensity. "And I need to know you are safe." "To hell with the gold," the words burst out of her, surprising them both. "I am not losing you, Parker. We go together or we do not go at all." For a moment, he stared at her like he could not quite believe what he had heard. Then he kissed her, hard and desperate, one hand cupping the back of her head while the other still held his rifle. Victoria kissed him back with everything she had, pouring 2 years of loneliness and a day's worth of fear, and the sudden, overwhelming knowledge that she loved this stubborn, brave cowboy into that single moment. They broke apart when the barn's front door crashed open. Parker pulled away, breathing hard. "Together then. But if I tell you to run, you run, promise me." "I promise." It was a lie and they both knew it, but there was no more time. Victoria climbed onto the stagecoach bench while Parker threw open the back door. She snapped the reins and the team lunged forward, bursting out into the moonlit night. Shouts erupted behind them, followed by gunfire. Victoria kept the horses running while Parker twisted in his seat, firing back at the outlaws scrambling to reach their own mounts. The road from Miller's station climbed through rocky terrain before joining the main route to Carson City. Victoria knew every curve and washout from previous runs, and she used that knowledge now, pushing the team to their limits while Parker provided covering fire. Return shots whined through the air, and she heard one strike the stagecoach body with a solid thunk. "4 of them chasing us," Parker shouted over the thunder of hooves and wheels. "The others must have stayed at the station." Victoria prayed Miller and his wife were safe, but she could not think about that now. The road leveled out onto a long, straight stretch, and their pursuers closed the distance, their lighter mounts faster than the heavy stagecoach. Parker fired twice more, and one of the outlaws fell from his saddle. 3 left, he reported, reloading with practiced speed, but 3 was still too many. Victoria saw the dawn beginning to break in the east, gray light washing out the stars. In an hour they would be at the outskirts of Carson City where they could find help, but they needed to survive the next hour first. The outlaw leader, the one with the silver conchos, drew alongside the stagecoach. He aimed his pistol at Victoria, and time seemed to slow. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw Parker turn and raise his rifle, knew with terrible certainty that one of them was about to die. Parker's shot came first. The outlaw jerked backward, his own shot going wild, and tumbled from his horse. The remaining 2 outlaws immediately broke off their pursuit, veering away and disappearing into the rocks. Without their leader, they had no stomach for the fight. Victoria kept the team running for another mile before she finally let them slow. Her arms shook with exhaustion, and her throat was raw from shouting commands to the horses. When she finally pulled them to a walk, Parker lowered his rifle and turned to her. "You all right?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. He had saved her life. If he had been a fraction of a second slower, she would be dead on the road right now. The reality of how close they had come crashed over her, and she felt tears sting her eyes. "Hey." Parker slid closer on the bench and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Hey, it is over. We made it." "You could have died." The words came out broken. "He almost shot you, but he did not. We are both fine, and we are almost to Carson City." He pressed a kiss to her temple, gentle and reassuring. "No more bandits between here and there. The worst is over." Victoria leaned into him, letting herself take comfort from his strength. They stayed like that as the sun rose, painting the Nevada landscape in gold and amber. The road began to show signs of civilization, ranches and small farms, then the outlying buildings of Carson City itself. When they rolled into the city proper just after 8 in the morning, Victoria felt like she had been awake for a week. But she drove straight to the Mint, where armed guards and officials waited to receive the shipment. Parker climbed down first and helped her from the bench, his hand steady on her waist. The Mint supervisor, a portly man named Henderson, looked them over with wide eyes. "My God, Miss Ellsworth, we heard reports of trouble on the road. The Taggart Gang." "Twice," Parker answered before Victoria could. "Once at Devil's Cut and again near Miller's Station, but the gold is all here." Henderson directed his guards to unload and count the shipment while a clerk prepared Victoria's payment. She stood to one side with Parker, suddenly unsure what happened next. The job was done. The gold was delivered. Parker had said he would ride back to Hamilton, but the thought of him leaving made her chest ache. "Victoria." He took her hand, drawing her away from the bustle of the guards. "Come with me, just for a few hours. I promised you dinner, remember?" She smiled, exhausted and filthy and happier than she had been in years. "I think I could eat." Carson City had several good restaurants, but Parker led her to a small place near the edge of town that served steak and potatoes and strong coffee. They ate without talking much, both too tired for conversation, but Victoria found she did not mind the silence. There was a comfort in simply being with Parker, in knowing he was safe and beside her. After they ate, he walked her to the boarding house where she usually stayed when in Carson City. On the porch, away from prying eyes, he pulled her close and kissed her again, slower this time, tender rather than desperate. "I am not going back to Hamilton," he said when they finally broke apart. "Not yet anyway. I am staying here until you are ready to make the return trip. And then I am riding with you again. Parker, you do not have to do that. The Taggart Gang is broken and the leader is dead. I know." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "But I am not ready to leave you yet. Maybe I will never be ready. Is that all right?" Victoria thought about her carefully guarded independence, about all the years she had insisted on doing everything alone. Then she thought about how it had felt to have Parker beside her, fighting with her, trusting her to do her job while he did his. He did not try to take over or protect her from herself. He just stood with her, and that made all the difference. "More than all right," she whispered. "Stay." They spent 3 days in Carson City, ostensibly waiting for Victoria's stagecoach to be repaired and for her to rest. In reality, they were learning each other. Parker told her about growing up in Wyoming, about his brother and his parents who still wondered when he would settle down. Victoria told him about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her father's belief that she could do anything she set her mind to. They walked through Carson City in the evenings, ate meals together, talked until late into the night sitting on the boarding house porch. Parker never pressured her for more than she was ready to give, content with stolen kisses and held hands. But Victoria felt herself falling deeper with every hour, drawn to his quiet strength, and the way he saw her completely, without trying to change or diminish her. On the 4th day, they started back toward Hamilton with an empty stagecoach. The return journey was peaceful, almost leisurely after the tension of the outbound trip. They stopped at Miller's station and were relieved to find the proprietor and his wife unharmed. The outlaws had ridden off after Victoria and Parker, leaving the couple alone. "I knew you would make it through," Miller said, shaking Parker's hand with obvious respect. "Takes a special kind of courage to stand against the Taggart Gang." "Takes a special kind of woman to drive that stagecoach," Parker replied, looking at Victoria with unmistakable pride. Back in Hamilton 2 days later, word of their successful run had already spread. The bank manager greeted them effusively, praising Victoria's skill and thanking Parker for his assistance. The miners had gotten their pay on time, and the bank's reputation was intact, but Victoria barely heard the congratulations. She was too aware of Parker standing beside her, too conscious that their journey together had ended. He would go back to the Bar 7 Ranch or drift on to somewhere new, and she would return to her regular freight runs. The thought felt wrong, incomplete, like a story ending in the middle of a chapter. That evening, as the sun set over Hamilton, Parker found her in the livery stable where she was checking on her horses. He leaned against a stall door, watching her work with a small smile on his face. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Just thinking about how I could watch you do ordinary things for the rest of my life and never get bored." Victoria's hand stilled on the brush she was using. "Parker." "I love you, Victoria." He said it simply, no hesitation or doubt. "I think I started loving you when I saw you in Hamilton that first time, but I know for certain now. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you drive a stagecoach like you were born to it. I love that you do not need me to rescue you, but you let me stand beside you anyway." She set down the brush with shaking hands. "I love you too. I did not think I had room in my life for this, for someone else, but you just fit, like you were always supposed to be there." Parker crossed the stable in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Marry me. Not because you need me or I need you, but because we are better together than apart. We can keep running freight, or we can do something else entirely. I do not care what we do as long as we do it together." Victoria kissed him instead of answering, pouring every ounce of love and joy and yes into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she smiled up at him. "That is a yes, in case it was not clear. Pretty clear." His grin was wide and genuine. "Though you might want to say it out loud so I can remember the exact words for when I am old and gray." "Yes, Parker Garrison, I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Hamilton's church, with Miller and Ruth as witnesses. Victoria wore a dress borrowed from Ruth because she did not own one of her own, and Parker wore his best shirt with his gun belt left at home for once. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Parker kissed her, Victoria felt like her whole life had been leading to this moment. They bought a small house on the edge of Hamilton, with a barn big enough for Victoria's freight business and a corral for Parker's horses. Victoria continued to run cargo, but now Parker rode with her on every journey, the two of them becoming known as the most reliable freight team in Nevada. Banks and mining companies requested them specifically for valuable shipments, knowing that Victoria's skill and Parker's steady presence guaranteed safe delivery. A year after their wedding, Victoria realized she was pregnant. The news terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She had never imagined herself as a mother, had always assumed her life would be freight wagons and open roads. But Parker's joy was infectious, and she found herself excited to meet the child they had created together. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1884, a healthy baby with Victoria's dark hair and Parker's blue eyes. They named her Sarah, after Victoria's mother. Victoria took 2 months away from freight hauling, learning the strange new rhythms of motherhood while Parker took on extra work at nearby ranches to make up the lost income. But when Sarah was old enough, Victoria returned to the job she loved, this time with her daughter sleeping in a basket secured in the stagecoach. Parker joked that Sarah would learn to walk on a moving wagon, and he was not far wrong. The baby seemed soothed by the motion and the sounds of the horses, falling asleep to the creak of wheels and her parents' voices. 3 years later, a son followed. They named him Daniel, after Victoria's father, and he proved just as adaptable to life on the road as his sister. The Garrison family became a familiar sight across Nevada, the freight hauling couple with 2 small children who somehow managed to maintain the fastest, most reliable service in the territory. As the years passed, Hamilton grew and changed. The wildest days of the frontier gave way to more settled times. The Taggart Gang became a story told in saloons rather than an active threat. Railroads began connecting the major cities, reducing the need for freight wagons on some routes. But Victoria and Parker adapted, finding new opportunities in smaller towns the railroad did not reach, building a reputation that extended beyond Nevada into California and Arizona. They added more wagons to their operation, hired a few trusted drivers, built their small business into something substantial. Sarah, at 16, announced she wanted to learn the freight business. Victoria taught her daughter everything she knew about handling teams and reading roads and negotiating with difficult customers. Parker taught her to shoot and to stay calm when trouble arose. By 18, Sarah was running her own routes, as capable and confident as her mother had been at that age. Daniel, quieter and more bookish, surprised them all by developing a talent for the business side of operations. He kept the accounts, negotiated contracts, and managed the logistics that allowed the family business to thrive. At 20, he had turned their freight operation into one of the most successful in the region. Victoria and Parker celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary at the same restaurant in Carson City, where they had eaten after delivering the bank's gold. The place had been renovated and expanded, no longer the small establishment it had been, but they sat at a corner table and remembered. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked, reaching across the table to take Parker's hand. "You could have stayed free, could have kept drifting." Parker's hair had threads of gray now, and lines had formed around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But his smile was the same, warm and genuine. "Not for one second. Every good thing in my life started the day I decided to ride shotgun on your stagecoach. I was so angry when you would not leave me alone. I know, you looked like you wanted to shoot me." He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. "Best decision I ever made, refusing to take no for an answer." Victoria laughed, feeling the same flutter in her chest that she had felt 20 years ago in Miller's barn. "I love you, Parker Garrison. Then, now, always." "Always," he agreed, "through Bandit country and beyond." They returned to Hamilton as the autumn of 1902 painted the Nevada hills in gold and crimson. Sarah ran most of the freight operations now, with Daniel managing the business. Victoria and Parker took fewer runs, content to let their children carry the legacy forward. But sometimes, when the weather was fine and the road called to them, they would harness up a team and drive out into the desert together. Just the two of them, the horses, and the wide Nevada sky. Parker would sit beside Victoria on the bench, his hand over hers on the reins, and they would remember the wild ride that had brought them together. On one such journey, as the sun set behind the mountains and turned the alkali flats to copper and rose, Victoria guided the wagon to a stop. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into night, the first stars beginning to emerge. "You remember Devil's Cut?" Victoria asked. "When those bullets were flying and everything was chaos." "I remember thinking that if I died right then, at least I would die doing something that mattered, protecting something precious." Parker squeezed her hand. "I did not realize then just how precious you would become." "You gave me something I did not know I needed," Victoria said softly. "A partner, someone who saw my strength and did not try to diminish it, who stood with me instead of in front of me. You gave me a home, a purpose, a family." Parker turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the last light of the sunset. "You gave me everything, Victoria." She kissed him, gentle and slow, savoring the taste of 20 years of love and partnership. When they pulled apart, the stars had fully emerged, thousands of brilliant points scattered across the vast darkness. The desert stretched around them, silent and ancient, witness to their love story written in dust and determination. They made camp there under the stars, something they had not done in years. Parker built a small fire while Victoria unpacked their supplies. They ate simple food and drank coffee, talking about their children and their grandchildren, about the freight business and the way the world was changing. But mostly they sat close together, Victoria leaning against Parker's shoulder, his arm around her waist, and simply existed in the moment. The crackling fire, the distant call of a coyote, the whisper of wind across the sage. All the things that had been part of their lives since that day Parker had ridden shotgun without being asked. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly. "For what?" "For being stubborn. For not listening when I told you to go away. For loving me enough to risk your life for mine." Parker pressed a kiss to her hair. "Thank you for letting me stay. For taking a chance on a drifter cowboy who did not know when to mind his own business." Victoria smiled, closing her eyes and letting the peace of the desert night settle over her. She thought about that younger version of herself, loading strong boxes of gold onto a stagecoach in the pre-dawn darkness, determined to prove she could handle the dangerous journey alone. She had been strong then, capable and brave. but she was stronger now with Parker beside her. Not because he made her stronger, but because love had added a dimension to her life she had never imagined possible. She had learned that accepting help was not weakness, that partnership did not diminish independence, that two people could build something together that was greater than either could achieve alone. The fire burned low as the night deepened. Victoria and Parker spread their bedrolls side by side and lay looking up at the stars, fingers intertwined between them. The same stars that had watched them drive through Bandit country, that had illuminated their first kiss, that had shone on their wedding day and the births of their children. "I would do it all again," Victoria whispered. "Every mile, every danger, every moment, all of it exactly the same." "So would I," Parker agreed. "Every single moment that led me to you." They fell asleep like that under the Nevada stars, hands linked and hearts full. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a love story in the dust and danger of the Wild West, who had proved that the strongest partnerships were the ones where both people stood as equals, facing the world together. In the morning, they would return to Hamilton, to their children and grandchildren, to the life they had built together. But for now, in this moment, they were simply Victoria and Parker, the freight driver and the cowboy who had ridden shotgun, whose love had been forged in the fire of Bandit country and had endured through 20 years of joy and challenge and change. And in the end, that was all they needed. Each other, the open road, and the promise of tomorrow.